Hello, and welcome to our presentation on Pompeii and its erasure. So, what is the pseudoscience behind this site? In addition to the multitude of bodies left over, there are statues of Greek gods, deities, makeup, and jewelry that were found on the bodies of men and women alike. These finds, along with the wipeout of the city, allowed room for outsiders to form theories that this culture was in opposition to God. These shrines and worship of other gods suggested that this society kindles God's wrath. Although this lacks any archaeological evidence, this further pushes the idea that this society was eliminated due to God's wrath, like other stories in the Bible. In some biblical research, they claim that there were inscriptional references to Sodom and Gomorrah on the walls of the buildings left over from this site. They also claim that those inscriptions were were the work of a Jew, which leads to more speculations and questions. And here on the bottom left, I inserted a picture of some of the deities and tools that were used in the shrine during worship. So, what really happened? Archaeologists were able to refute this theory due to the excavations they made. There was an extensive amount of evidence that there was volcanic ash found on the victims and around the city. The bodies were deemed to be buried at least 19 feet or 16 meters under the debris, along with the artifacts found. So, why don't archaeologists favor pseudoscientific interpretations? Archaeologists mainly struggle with the idea of being a reliable source. If there is no hard scientific evidence for sites that they research and excavate, then it will be easy to discredit the job and the people and the research as a whole. It can affect the publishing and the funding, and this pretty much can affect the discipline as a whole. This can also strain people's relationship with history. If people find out that they are being fed misinformation, they won't rely on archaeologists and these sources anymore because then they will see the information as an unstable foundation. So, low level theory, middle level theory, and high level theory. These are things that we talked about during class. And these are the three major ways that archaeologists can theorize to help understand a culture or society based on the artifacts and remains found when excavating. So, what is Pompeii's low level theory? Um, During the excavations, archaeologists found bread, animal bones, and this stand that they assumed to be a stand that was selling fish, beef, pork, chicken, and other animals. And so we can conclude that this was part of the society's diet. And what would be a middle level theory? There was a statue of a Greek god named Apollo. And because of this, we can assume that this was a part of the belief system that the society had during this time. And lastly, what would be the high level theory? Overall, we can generalize and say that Pompeii must have been a polytheistic society. And this would be due to the many shrines that they had found with many different gods and many different belief systems.
So how do archaeologists know what they know about the site of Pompeii? Archaeologists and volcanologists were able to survey the Pompeii excavation of the AD 79 eruption in the last few years. The site they surveyed specifically was the Casa di Stebianus. Upon surveying the site, it was quite apparent that they could begin to create low-level theories. The site along with the remains were embedded in ash and sediment, and there was a deposit that formed on top of the, quote, fallout pumice bed, unquote. After observation, they were able to link their findings with hypotheses of what produced them, which are also known as middle-level theories. Because of their observations, they theorized that pyroclastic density currents must have entered into houses through openings or collapsed roofs, leading to the people of Pompeii being engulfed in ash. But what are pyroclastic density currents, and why do you need to know them in order to understand this article? Pyroclastic density currents, or PDCs, are gas particles that flow at ground level as a result of the collapse of an eruption column, which is pictured here. They move away from volcanoes at high speed and are able to move ash at a very fast rate, with also high temperatures. They also found that there were no broken bones or signs of trauma to the bodies. Their clothing was also intact and was not burnt. After the excavation, alongside archaeologists, volcanologists were able to take the deposit and lamina thickness from the ash. They then calculated equations such as gas density, particle density, aggregation rate, and temperature. After many different equations, they were able to find that the strength of the pressure of the pyroclastic density flow was low, being lower than 1 kPa. The temperature of the gas particles was also low, and they calculated a flow duration of around 17 minutes. These discoveries can also be taken back into the middle level theories, where low pressure can be represented by the no broken bones or the trauma to the bodies. The low temperature of the gas particles can be represented by the clothing being intact and not burnt. Pyroclastic flow can also be represented by the covering of the ash over the bodies. Based on other literature that was cited in the article, fine ash exposure can only be survived for a few minutes, around 3 to 5, whereas this flow duration lasted around 17 minutes. Archaeologists were able to conclude that there was no way that the people of Pompeii would have been able to survive the flow duration of 17 minutes. These conclusions were able to address high-level theories, such as questions like why did the people of Pompeii die, and why were their bodies able to be preserved?
How do they know what they know about the site of Pompeii in terms of frequency of eruptions and evidence of possible reconstruction in the midst of these eruptions? Evidence that's been collected about Pompeii to prove how we know what we know was in a research study called the Pompeii Forum Project. Within the Pompeii Forum Project, they took a look at a specific building called the Macellum, which can give insight to the bigger picture of the whole city of Pompeii. The Macellum was a large market and a focal point of the city and was constructed in several phases. Since there were such noticeable patterns of reconstruction, this can give us insight on how people of the society had to handle frequent earthquakes as well as possible frequency of earthquakes during this time. The method used to assess this damage was called the Mercalli scale, which measures the intensity of damage at a location on observable effects of the earthquakes. The scale helped to determine everything that happened in 62 AD to 79 AD and everything in between. One of the three events is likely responsible for the damage to the building. The earthquakes in 62, which could be a cluster of quakes due to the pattern of reconstruction that they found from the damage of 62 AD, may have been restored by the ancient communities, but the damage of the eruption of 79 AD was not. In 62, there was a recorded fallout of pumice, which we can see in the middle image, and the pyroclastic flow, which stopped everything in its tracks, was caused by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79. Um, the bottom image is what the forum was predicted to look like pre-earthquakes for the time range of 62 to 79 AD, and the top image is what it looked like post-excavation. It's important to mention the possibility of additional earthquakes occurring between 62 and 79 AD. The Pompeii Forum study found it helpful to record damage post-excavation to measure how the earthquakes have affected this site and preserve the integrity of how it was in the big eruption of 79. There were 4 notable earthquakes post-excavation, with the worst being the earthquake of Epernia of 1980. Martini notes that the strongest shaking recorded level was level 7, which causes cracking in good quality and unreinforced masonry, and damage in low quality masonry. This is the image of what Pompeii looked like post Epernia of November 23rd of 1980.
Although Pompeii had occurred a very long time ago, researchers were still able to gather material, and from that material, they were able to figure out how most people and residents died, which were due to buildings and floors collapsing. The volcano eruption produced 6 pyroclastic surges. And as you can see, it shows the difference in all the 6 surges and how far they reached within the area. Researchers were able to get an estimate about the thickness, size, and components these surges had. The 4th surge was the one that caused the most casualties within Pompeii. But it was also able to maintain the remains due to the flying particles the surges created. These remains seem to be well conserved because the bodies are frozen in action. Researchers were able to use those remains in order to gather more information about what really happened during the volcano eruption at Pompeii. And then, as you can see here, there's a baby in picture A on the bottom, and then in B, like, you could see how it's almost like as if they were like covered in cement. At least that's what it looks like in the pictures. And then there's also another child all the way at the bottom. And then more pictures of how these people looked and the state of after the eruption. The researchers didn't need approval from the ethics committee to use these remains because the University of Naples already approved and provided a few of the remains for this case. The researchers observed the bone samples under a microscope by scanning and lighting them. In order to figure out at what temperatures these remains went through, they compared recent human bones with the remains. So they ended up heating up the recent bones at different temperatures, and then after a while, they compared the color of those bones to the remains from Pompeii. And based on the color, it showed at what temperatures they were. And these temperatures ranged from 100 degrees Celsius to 800 degrees Celsius. Most people thought that the citizens at Pompeii died due to the lava, but that's not the case. They ended up dying before the lava even reached them. It is important for researchers to explore the past and try to understand what went in Pompeii. The reasons for doing so is to prepare and give insight into the future if this calamity were to happen again. So far, for a disaster this big, they find it best to evacuate residents from the area.